Okay, let's do Pe'al Halacha Ches and Tes we're going to do. Okay, the Mechaber says, Devash Devarim Mutter. Honey from bees is mutter. Va'afal pi shegufi hatvarim mu'af. But even though there are bee parts mixed into it, mashfishim hadvash mehem, and when you want to remove the honey from those parts, you heat up the honey so that it could liquefy, so that it could go through a filter, so you can filter out those bee parts. Mutter, it's still mutter anyhow. Even though there's a bleed going from those bee parts into the honey, we shouldn't have this in Hamafgam. The bee parts are nice Hamafgam to the honey, so it's mutter. This din is almost an exact copy of the din in Pei Daled. Pei Daled, Halacha Gimel is almost an exact copy of this din. When we were there, we spoke about two things. I'll just remind you. Two things. First is, Taisa says that bee legs are considered to be atzamas, and they're not asr, and therefore bee legs would not be a shailon. So that's why the Mechaber says on purpose, gufeit for them, bee parts, like other parts of the bee's body would be in there, but not bee legs, because bee legs are not asr. And the second thing is, and we spoke about then, why isn't it bittul chatchila, to warm up the honey and get the bleeds into it? So it's one of the places where the din says that Ein Kavanas Levatel is mutter. And we had a diyun about that whole din about Ein Kavanas Levatel. We spoke about that. It was very negate actually to the next din in Pei Daled about broccoli kugel. That was Pei Daled, that was Yudal. We spoke about this in Yud Gimel, both of these. Okay, we'll go on to round out the whole din, which is Halacha Tes, Dvash Tzir V'Gizin, honey from these different other kinds of insects. We'll a little bit talk about that in a second, what they are. It says in parentheses, Mine Dvarim V'Tzirnim, they're mutter to eat those. V'yesh Misha Oiser, but some people say that it's aser, and the Ramah says, we don't have to worry about whether they're mutter or aser. We don't have these kind of things around here. We got lots of bees, but we don't have any of these other things, so it's not negate whether they're mutter or aser. We don't have them anyhow. Okay, so the first thing we'll talk about is honey itself. Okay, so first if I can explain to you a little bit about one here, it's just the technicalities of it, negates the din. That is, honey is I'm sorry, there's something called sucrose. Sucrose is a disaccharide. It has two sugar-type molecules connected to each other. One is a glucose and one is a fructose. Okay, sugars, there's a bunch of different ways they can be set up. So a glucose and a fructose together is called sucrose. Okay, and nectar made by flowers is a sucrose. It's this disaccharide. Okay, bees collect the nectar. They put it into their body. Okay, and when they come to their hive, they spit it out. But when they spit it out, they don't just spit it back out by itself. Some of their saliva gets mixed in, and their saliva has two enzymes in it. One's called invertase, we call it, and one called glucose oxidase. Okay? I'll tell you about that in a second. So what they do is, after they plop it into the hive, it comes out almost exactly as it went in. Almost exactly the same way, except it has the saliva mixed into it.
They just hold it in their mouth?
I think they have a special sac that they hold it in their mouth. They hold it in, and then they spit it back out. And when they put it into the hive, some bees fan it with their wings, which helps dry it out. Okay, it helps remove moisture, and at the same time, these two enzymes are doing two different jobs on the bees, on the honey. One enzyme breaks apart the glucose and the fructose. Okay, so instead of it being sucrose, which is a disaccharide, now it's two individual sugar molecules. It breaks it apart, and one of the enzymes takes the glucose and turns it into gluconic acid. Okay, makes it from glucose into gluconic acid. Okay, the combination of there being very little moisture, because the bees fanned it dry, and it being more acidic, because it has gluconic acid instead of glucose, means that it doesn't spoil. Microorganisms don't like to live in such an environment, and therefore it doesn't spoil. That's why honey doesn't spoil, because those two changes that the bee made to it, it split it in half, turned this into gluconic acid, it dried it out, makes it that it's not hospitable to microorganisms, and mamela doesn't spoil.
So honey is gluconic acid and
fructose.
That's honey.
Right. It could be that some of it says it's glucose. I'm not sure.
Gluconic acid into fructose.
Right. So I mean,
gluconic acid into fructose doesn't make the honey afterwards.
Well, that is what honey is. When you eat honey, that's this mixture, this combination of all this stuff together.
Can they synthetically then make honey if you know that that's the ingredients of the two make honey like a bee would make honey?
I have no idea. Okay, I can't imagine, but that it's worthwhile. I mean, bees do it for free, you know. So I don't know.
Because there was a big bee shortage.
Right, but the issue of the bee shortage is that they need bees to pollinate plants, not that they need bees to make honey. That
it's a separate issue.
Right.
Pollinate plants.
Okay, I don't know. I don't know if anybody tried to make it synthetically. No idea. Okay. Okay, so the Gemara, as you probably know, the Gemara says two reasons why honey should be mutter. Here we are at the end of the simon about Yotzim and Atame. So the Gemara says, why isn't the Yotzim and Atame? It's coming from a trait animal, from a bee. So the Gemara says, the Gemara says two reasons. First reason is that it's not a Yotzim. Okay, the Gemara says, it doesn't come from the bee's body. The bee just takes in the nectar, spits it back out, almost identical to the way it came in, and so it goes and it's really, so the bee is just transporting the nectar from the plant to someplace else. So that's it. So it's not a yotze at all. That's the first Gemara's answer. The Gemara's second answer is that it really is a yotze. It really is yotze. Now the Gemara doesn't say why it's a yotze, but l'chayr it means is because passing through the bee's body is what makes it eventually change into something else, and somehow that makes it into a yotze. You know, the being in its body made such a nafkamina to it. I'm not really sure why it should be a yotze. The Gemara says it is a yotze. But there's a pasuk. The pasuk says, we call sheretz oiv. We call sheretz oiv. We make a drasha that there's one yotze from a bug, which is mutter, from a sheretz oiv that's mutter, and that must be that it's honey. Okay? Okay, so now, the Gemara says there's a nafkamina. Nafkamina between them is what we spoke about, what was halacha tes. What happens if you have dvash tzir v'gizin? What happens if you have dvash from a different bug? You get honey from a different bug, not from the bee. I don't know what it means. But there is such a thing called I don't remember, Pollen, wasp, which makes honey also. Okay, so maybe it means there's some other insect that makes honey. The Gemara says, the Gemara knew what it was. I'm going to talk about that in a second. The Gemara said there was something. The Gemara said, I'll talk about that in a second. The Gemara said something. There's some kind of dvash siri gizin. According to the first chapter of the Gemara, it's mutter. Because it doesn't go, the insect doesn't do anything to it. The insect just passes through its body. According to the second teretz of the Gemara, it's asur because the only one thing that's mutter is dvash from a regular dvash, but not this special kind of dvash is not mutter. Okay, so the beginning of the Gemara that dvash dvarim is mutter, that was halacha ches. It says honey is mutter. Halacha tes, the Mechaber wrote 2 days. First he says that it's mutter, and then he says v'yesh misha oiser. Okay, those are the 2 days in the Gemara. Okay, so the regular rules of
is the second day in the Gemara.
It is. It's 2 days in the Gemara. The Gemara says a machlokes. The Gemara says a nafkamina vashgiz mitzirin. Gemara says it's a nafkamina and a machlokes rishonim. Which way passing? Yeah, but I mean the Gemara brings 2 days. If it's really 2 days in the Gemara, and the machlokes how we passing? Of course. So well, I'm sorry, skip that step. Okay, so the general rules of how we would read the Shulchan Aruch would be, the Shach says to read like this is when the Mechaber says bestam, one thing, and then v'yesh misha something, so we go like the stam. Okay, so the stam here is to say that dvash gizin v'tzin is mutter. Okay, that's how we would read the Shulchan Aruch. The Pri Chadash argues. The Pri Chadash says that no, really the din is that it's asur. Okay, it's not clear if he thinks that the Mechaber holds like that, but he says it's asur, and he's medayik. The Daki Tshuva is medayik that the Ramah holds it's asur also, because he says the Ramah says. We don't have to worry about this because we don't have giz and mitzir around us anyhow. Now, why would Ramah be saying that altogether? If the din was that they're mutter, why tell us, don't worry about it because we don't have them around in our towns anyhow? I mean, what's the point to tell us that? It's mutter anyhow. So if you have it in your town to be mutter, if you don't have it, you don't. I mean, why are you bothering to tell me that is mashma that really the Ramah holds that it's asur, and in fact, in Tzitz Eliezer, who we're going to talk about soon, Tzitz Eliezer brings that in the Teres Chatas, okay, I think he means this in the Simon of the Teres Chatas, that means the Ramah has like a kitzer at the end of the Teres Chatas of what he said. The Ramah only brings the second day. He only brings the second day that Dvash Giz and Mitzir are asur. Okay, so that's a mashmois that the Ramah really held that it was asur, which the Daki Tshuva already had said is a dik when the Ramah said it altogether. Now, that doesn't mean that the Ramah means we pass like the second day for sure. Okay? It means is if we just read the Ramah on the Teres Chatas, we'd say the Ramah says we should be machmir for the second day. We're going to see soon that there are cases where the second day is a kula. We don't know yet that the Ramah would hold that it's a kula. In the specific case, should you eat dvash gizim v'tzirin, the Ramah says no, you shouldn't. Maybe he was just saying that l'chumra. It's a safek d'oraisa, so you should be machmir about that. The Tzitz Eliezer wants to say it's even l'kula. Okay, that's what we'll see. He wants to say it even when it comes out to be an afkamina l'kula, which is we're going to come to. Okay, so it's a shaila how we should paskin. Seemingly we should say that the Mechaber hold that it's mutter and the Ramah hold that it's asur. We'll see more about that in a second. Now, I'm going to just tell you something about the dvash giz and mitzir. The Ramah says they're not around us, and we haven't even included it, but it is. So it really is not around. But I just want to say two things about it. And one is like this. in the Torah, when it mentions the tzira coming to help the Yidden get out of capture Eretz Yisrael, and most people translate tzira as a hornet. Okay, that's how most people think that the word tzira, when the Baruch says he's going to send the tzira to help chase the goyim out, right? And so it's translated as a hornet. So Rabbi Aronon showed me the other day. He did the other day that now there's a Japanese drink made from hornet
Excretions?
Yes, something from a hornet. An amino acid that they find in hornets. It's called VAM, which stands for Vespa amino acid mixture. And the theory is, well, the hornets have so much energy, and this is what gives them the energy. So if you drink it, it'll give you energy also. Okay, that's the theory. Okay, so now I hard to believe that the VAM is the dvash of the hornet. It didn't sound like that. From the reading of what I read up, it didn't like it was the
hormone.
It didn't sound like it was their dvash, but it was interesting anyhow. And if good news, in case anybody wants VAM, the company swears that they make it from, they don't get it from hornets. That it's just the same thing that they have in the hornets, but they make it artificially. They make it some other way. They don't actually get it from hornets. Okay, so if you want to drink VAM, I don't know.
Certifying it?
Some other company gives you the real thing.
Yeah, if you want the real.
Certifying it, by the way?
We haven't been asked yet to certify it, but you never know.
Maybe they can put in like 1 billionth of one syrup of the amino acid so that they can,
but they said it's not different. They don't get it from the hornets. In case you're worried about, they don't get it from the hornets.
Don't worry about Peter or something, yeah.
Okay. Okay. Now the other thing is more of a shiloh, which is the Pri is a kasha. He says Rashi says in Shabbos that gizin are a kosher grasshopper. So frek the Pri what's wrong with dvash gizin? Gizin are kosher. Okay, gizin are kosher grasshoppers. So why do you think that dvash gizin should be not kosher? It's dvash from a kosher animal. Okay, so it's honey. Not coming from bees are trade, but gizin are kosher. Okay, so the Pri says what they say about it. Ramosha said, I'm not going to tell you what they say. Ramosha talks about it, and the Pri talks about it. There's a bunch of people speak about the shiloh. I'm mentioning it to you. Gizin are kosher. So what's wrong? What could be wrong with dvash gizin? Okay, so
don't give me that heter from milk.
So I want to remind you that when we learn halacha hey, there's a machlokes. There's a machlokes whether the yotze from every yotze from a kosher animal is kosher or not. Is it only milk and eggs, or is it everything? Okay, and this is a raya. This is a raya that the yotze from a kosher animal is treif. Because here we have the yotze from a kosher animal, and we have a Gemara being clear whether it's mutter or asur, even though it's only a Rashi says it's kosher. Maybe everybody else holds it's a different animal. Rashi says that it's a kosher animal, and here we're talking about whether it should be kosher or treif. Is the implication is that a yotze from a kosher animal is not kosher? We talked about in the halacha hey, basically a shach and a rush, whether it's kosher. Okay, I'm just mentioning for that part. Okay, I mean again, there's other places we talk about the shiloh. It's a Pri Chadash and Pri Gadol through that. Okay, now. Okay, so now, another nafkamina. So the Gemara had its nafkamina, dvash gizin v'tzirin. I'm trying to rush because we have a lot to say. Okay, the Gemara had a machlokes about dvash gizin v'tzirin. Okay, there's someone in England, the mayor, he works for the OU. Okay, he came with another nafkamina. Okay, and his nafkamina was, there are an opposite nafkamina. And his nafkamina was like this. There are some bees that instead of collecting nectar, okay, there's two other kinds of things that they collect that he came up with. One is by the grape harvest. Okay, the bees hang around by the grape harvest, and they hang around in the garbage, eating all the sugar from the grapes. Okay, so instead of collecting sugar from nectar from plants, they're collecting sugar from the grape harvest. Well, that grape juice that they're picking up is stam yayin. So they're making honey out of stam yayin instead of out of nectar. So in that case, and another case,
how do you know it results in honey? Something that results in honey?
Yes, he was under the impression. Now the second one, but it's more for sure, is honey. The first one you would never know, because when you buy that honey, you would know that your bees ate you at the harvest. Okay. But the second one is more that people actually buy it specifically for this thing, which is there are insects, you for sure know, they're called aphids. Okay, there are little insects called aphids. Aphids have a secretion that's very sweet. Okay, so and actually there are ants that the way they I don't know if this is the right way to say it, but they enslave the aphids. Okay, they keep them under control so they can eat their secretion. Okay, but you think the ants have no one to pick on, right? So, okay. But there are bees that they specifically make sure that they eat this sweet aphid secretion. They keep them controlled, and the honey that they produce has a very special taste to it. Okay, because it's not coming from nectar; it's coming from this aphid secretion.
The beekeepers, in other words.
Right. The beekeepers control their bees to only use from these aphids. However, they do that.
Eat the secretion.
Right. To only eat that and not eat nectar. And the male produces a special honey that you could buy, as specially made from this aphid secretion.
What's it called?
I'm sorry, I don't remember. I'm sorry, I don't remember what it was called. Okay, so
You give a hefsher to it?
we don't give a hefsher because listen, so Rav Shachta said, according to the first teretz of the Gemara, this is going to be asur. The first teretz of the Gemara is that it's not a yotze from the bee. It's only whatever they pick up, that's what they drop off. So no, this is coming from an aphid. So then it's going to be asur because it's coming from a trace animal. According to the second teretz of the Gemara, that any honey that a bee makes is mutter. I mean, really is a yotze, but it's mutter. Thank you. It's mutter anyhow. But
Like the first time of the carrier, you're just right.
right. No, it's usher because it's whatever it came from. So here it came from a bud instead of coming from a flower. So it's usher. According to the second teretz of the Gemara, that every honey is mutter, even though it's a yotze, it doesn't make a difference. Honey is mutter, there's a cousin. So this honey is mutter also. Okay. That was a backwards nafkamina. Okay. Now, Rabbi Shachta had another nafkamina, not to get to most of the people here, from a Daki Tshuva. Daki Tshuva says that
It's not mocha, because
okay.
could be. The reason why the honey brings the Gemara in the simple is it's shvacha yotze. It's not it's shvacha.
No, it's exertion cousin.
Yeah, but the other cousin is only in sound. Why did they pick on the vash? Why did the Gemara know this yotze is mutter? Because all the yotze, this is shvacha yotze.
That's not how the Gemara says it. That's not how the Gemara says it. You could say that. The Gemara doesn't say it. We're going to say, I'll tell you in a second what the Gemara says. You'll hear in a second. The Gemara has a different hesber for why honey is different than other things. You'll hear in a second. Okay, you could be. Okay. Rabbi Shachta has another nafkamina, which is Daki Tshuva brings that the Kabbalim don't eat anything that comes from a living thing on days that you say tachana.
Oh, that's right.
Okay,
San Diego,
Who don't-
Alaska.
Okay, so they don't. So he says. According to the first teretz of the Gemara, honey is not a yotze from an animal.
Right.
So therefore, since it's not a yotze from the animal, so Kabbalim can eat honey, even though they say tachana. Okay. Because it's not a yotze from the animal. You're eating nectar. If it's a yotze, and it's like milk, they won't eat milk or meat on those that they're vegan on days that you say tachana because I don't know how people go, whatever the reason I'll pick Kabbalah. But according to this, you can eat honey even on days that you say tachana. Okay, so in case anybody here has that in practice, you could eat honey on days when you say tachana. Okay, so a little bit about retail honey before we move on. Okay, a few little things about retail honey. Honey is kosher. There's such a thing as flavored honey. Okay, and of course flavored honey needs hashgacha because the flavor needs hashgacha. That's obvious. But lots of honeys are labeled in a way that sounds like it's flavored, but it's really not. They'll say orange blossom honey. Orange blossom honey doesn't mean it's flavored like orange blossoms. It's just telling you which plant this bee got its nectar from. It has nothing to do with being flavored. It's just somehow, and that's supposed to appeal to you that you want that honey versus that one. That's fine. That's not a problem. Okay. Now, there's reports every so often about people adulterating honey. Okay. The most common thing we hear about is people adulterate with corn syrup. So for year-round, it's not negated because it's kosher also. Whether it's honey or not is sort of not our issue. Kosher it is, so that's not a problem. For Pesach, we're makbid. We tell people they should get honey with hashgacha because there's concern of adulteration. Hagam, that really doesn't make so much sense from a din perspective because you could adulterate it with glucose that's made from chametz. There's such a thing, and maybe if we lived in Europe, that would be more of a chashash. In America, it's not a chashash that they're getting glucose from chametz. They could be getting glucose like corn syrup, that's kidneys, but then it'd have to be more than 50%, which is also not mistaver. You know, I mean, if you want to adulterate it, I mean, you don't want to sell people carrot syrup. I mean, you want to sell them honey, so with a little carrot syrup in it. Okay, but that's what we do. We tell people to not put it. It's not the end of the world.
No, I mean, didn't we find it?
And then the last thing is...
that recently?
What?
Did we start that recently? We were always telling people that
honey
with
years
hashgacha.
we've been talking honey hashgacha.
And you got to be sure that the hashgacha is that it's on it. It's not the same thing.
Okay, that's a good question. I can't answer that question. Okay, and the last part of this is that honey be'etzem does not need
Hashgacha, it's hashgacha for Kashrus Pesach.
No, we hashgacha as a group of Pesach.
We
We
don't
don't do anything.
hashgacha for honey. We're telling you about hashgacha.
hashgacha for Pesach. Yeah, that's instruction.
Well,
Well, he said v'atafka. Maybe that hashgacha is group one.
I always heard they were very well makri, and you don't have to worry.
Right.
I always thought that when they give hashgacha for Pesach, that means that they're...
Not necessarily. Okay, now and the last thing is that we honey, as I mentioned to you, does not need to be pasteurized because it's be'etzem, it's preserved. Okay, part of the chachma, what the bee does to it, makes it not need to be preserved afterwards.
Right.
However, there are companies who do pasteurize it, not for the preservation of it, but because it helps to make it more fluid. Actually, that's what the Mechaber said over here. It just liquefies it. It helps it flow through the kalim. So we tell people, so it's a small chashash. Maybe they're doing it on kalim that are also being used for other things. So it's not a very tremendous chashash. But on the other hand, there's so much honey with hashgacha on it, and come on, every honey you're going to find has hashgacha anyhow. So we tell people they should buy with hashgacha to avoid this little shayla that it could be.
I'm pretty sure they all heat it up. Everybody heats it.
Does everybody heat it up?
I think everybody.
Okay.
You know the raw honey that you get?
Yeah.
There's something you get, because supposedly raw honey, even that they got to heat up.
Just to get into the bottle.
Just to get the little around.
Okay.
Hang around.
Like honey at the farmer's market.
How do they get the honey out of those beehives?
I have no idea. Okay. Not negate first. Okay. Actually, negate two. It actually is negate in two things I'm talking about. I'm not going to mention it. Okay. The next thing is there's a big a big issue people speak about. It's something else that bees produce. We have a few other bee products to talk about. That's what we have left. It's called royal jelly. Okay. Royal jelly is this. I don't have a picture for you. I'm sorry, but it does not look like honey. It's a creamier color to it. It doesn't taste sweet like honey does. It actually tastes pretty awful. And they make it bees. Secrete it in order that they feed it to some of the larvae eat it, in particular the bee that's designated to become the queen bee. Okay, she eats it, and the male is called royal jelly because it's what's fed to the royal bee. Okay,
That comes from their body.
so that comes. That does not. It does not come. Wrong statement. It does not come.
We're getting there.
It does not come like honey does. Okay, so therefore, Rabbi Shafta says, according to the first side of the Gemara, it's for sure Asher. Because the first side of the Gemara is that it's something not made from a bee, they just transported it. Well, that's not what this is. Okay, that's not going to be with her. Rabbi Shafta says, even according to the second terms of the Gemara, Pasha says that he says it should be Asher also, because the Gemara says, it's not that everything that comes from a bee is mutter. That's not what the Gemara says. The Gemara says the drasha is that everything that doesn't have a shem levai is what's mutter. So honey doesn't have a shem levai. It's just called honey. As opposed to, let's say, dvash gizin is called dvash gizin. It's not called dvash plain. It has some other name that helps explain what it is. So anything that's not just called straight honey is what's usher. So no. But if you use the word honey, everybody knows you mean honey from the bee. You could be more specific and say dvash.
Date honey?
What do you say?
Is it really date honey?
Is what date honey?
Gosh. The Chumash. Yeah.
Yeah. But when you want to talk about honey from a bee, you don't say dvash dvarim. I know that even in the Torah calls it not like that. The word dvash generically just means honey from a bee. And if you want to say dvash from gizin, you have to say dvash gizin, or you have to call it dvam, or whatever. You have to give it some kind of a name to it. You can't just call it dvash gizin. And therefore, royal jelly is not called honey either. So even though it comes from the bee, but it's not coming from it's not called the honey that comes from the bee. He says it has a shame of it.
They don't even call it honey.
Correct. Okay. Now, the Titzel Yezer has a long tshuva to argue.
Because it's any different? They're called like
It's very different. No, it's very different. It's not the same thing. B'chal. It doesn't look the same and doesn't taste the same.
What is it used for?
It's medicinal. People think that has medicinal value.
There is that shame they give it to royal jelly. So what's the tzad to be matter?
I'm trying to tell you.
I was leading you into it.
Thank you so much. Okay.
Moving you along, Rabbi.
So the Titzel Yezer has a long tshuva to say that he thinks it's mutter. Okay. As long as you would say that it's mutter. Okay, so people who do that are saying because of him. Okay, so he says two things. His header is sort of based on two. I'm going to break into two parts. The first is he goes on for maybe a page to tell you that he's convinced that the halacha is like the second day of the Gemara. We said beforehand that the Mechaber seems to pass like the first day, and just a yesh misa for the second day for a bal nefesh should be machmer.
And the Ramah.
And we said the Ramah is saying like the second day. He says no, the Ramah is saying that we pass like the second day. Now he wants to say even l'kula. In our case, it's l'kula. He wants to say that. He brings other rayas from all kinds of other people that the din is really like the second day of the Gemara. Okay, so he says the first day of the Gemara I don't care about it. Not the Ramah is being machmer. Just don't care about the first day of the Gemara. So the royal child doesn't bother me. He says, now, but the second part he has to say is, why would the second day of the Gemara be makel about the royal jelly also? Okay, so he has a few different reasons. Okay, so one is, he says, the way it was described to him is that it tastes so disgusting that it's maybe even not royal achila, but at least it's pirsha. And remember, something that comes out of an animal is only asur if it's a yaitzik in the animal. If it's a pirsha, then it's going to be mutter. So he says, at least it's a pirsha. Okay? So Rabbi Shafta said that, listen, he says, we fed it to somebody. They fed it to Jim. I don't know if they did to Jim. They gave it to a guy, and they gave it to a guy to taste, and he said, it didn't taste great, but it didn't taste horrible either. Okay, so now, that was enough to explain why it's not royal achila. It is royal achila. But whether that makes it not pirsha, I'm not sure about that. Maybe it's already not edible enough. It's described as having a bitter taste. And even the guy who Rabbi Shachta gave it to said he tasted it, and it tasted not very good. It had a bitter taste, but it wasn't horrible. So Kenzain, it's enough to qualify as pirsha. Okay, but that's
Pirsha is the reason. Then it doesn't matter which text of the Gemara you don't go into.
right. Does not get. If this is pirsha, then we're going to go into both. Right, according to everything, it'll be both. Right, that's correct. Right, you're right. So since he didn't need that, you see, he could have said even according to the.
Right.
Okay. Second is, Rabbi Blech says this. Yisha Blech also has a couple pages to explain why he thinks it's mutter, and Tzitzilas brings it also. The Rabbeinu Gershom says that Shem Levi, when the Gemara says anything with a Shem Levi is usher, Shem Levi, the way Rabbeinu Gershom implies is that it has to have the name of the animal in it. So Dvash Gizin is usher because the description of the thing includes the name of the treif animal that it comes from. But if it doesn't include the name of the treif animal that it comes from, that's not considered to have a Shem Levi, and it's just considered to be a plain name. Okay? So we have a question how to understand the word Shem Levi. Okay? So Rabbi Shachta to that said, he says, first of all, it's not the Pashtus. Okay? Even Rabbi Gershon sounds like that. The Pashtus is that most other people do not learn like that. Shem Levi just means that it needs a more descriptive name. It's not a generic name, it's more descriptive. And royal jelly is surely more descriptive than just honey. It's something that has to give you some kind of extra background. Okay? And second, he says, well, I think it's called royal jelly. It's called royal jelly because royal describes that it comes from that's fed to a bee. Okay, so implied in the name.
I don't know what it was called.
That's true. So he's ignoring that. He's ignoring that.
What about it? Did they have it?
What is it?
They have it?
Well, they have. No. Nobody would eat such a thing. It doesn't taste good. People only eat honey. So it is.
I know it existed in the world, but maybe they didn't know how to harvest it. I don't know.
Okay, we spoke about it. We actually spoke back then. I was just listening. Oppenheimer was piping in about this. That really for these dinim, Rabbi Shachta himself says this, is that you have to think about what it was called back then. Okay, and not only do we have no way of knowing what they called it, but no one even knows if there even is a word in Lashon Kodesh for this. Right? I mean, what word is it to describe it? We even spoke about it then, that the word Dvash Gizin might not even be the way you speak about Lashon Kodesh. It's that it could be Lashon Kodesh, there is no word to describe that thing. So we call it, the honey that comes from Gizin is a description, not a name of the thing. It's just, there is no name in Lashon Kodesh. They didn't have that. They don't have names for microwaves in Lashon Kodesh either, you know what I mean? So we have to just make up a name that sort of fits for it, but it's not an inherent name to it. Okay. So anyhow, the way Rabbi Shachta said is mukubal. Most people say like that royal jelly is not kosher, and Yankees friends who give hashgacha to it, we don't accept it. Okay? We don't
accept this. What's the point you were making about the fact that it's called royal because they feed it to the queen bee?
And the male, so the name includes within it a reference to the treif animal. No, you say it's called Dvash Gizin, so it has Gizin in it. That's where it comes from. But here's where it's going to. But it's referencing the fact that it's related to bees.
Shem.
So even according to Rabbi Gershon, maybe this is considered Shem Levi. It's not exactly Shem, because there the Dvash is where it comes from a treif animal. Here the point is that it's in the service of treif animals.
But it's not Dvash because Dvash is Torah, and we don't say that because of Dvash is Torah, and that makes it into Shem Levi. Dvash Torah means that's the normal Shem.
Okay, next. Some other things. That's some simpler things. Okay, there's something called beeswax. Okay, beeswax is what they make the honeycombs out of. Okay, again, also nobody thought of eating it until recently. And
Honeycombs.
Need honeycomb cereal? Yeah. Okay. So neither of the Gemara's sorts are going to work because it's the bees make it from their body. They have a gland that produces this wax. Okay, so they have a gland, and neither sorts of Gemara are going to work for that. But I'm going to show you in a second a bunch of rayas that it is mutter. And the reason, before we get to the rayas that it's mutter, the assumption is the reason why it's mutter is because it's considered pirsha. Okay, it's not edible. Waxes are not edible. So it's considered a pirsha from the animal. So it's not a yoytz from the animal because it's a pirsha. Okay? So there's somebody, I mentioned his name before, Rabbi Yoni Robinson. He lives in Queens. At the time, I don't know what he does now. At the time, he was a professor who voluntarily did some work for the OU. He had an interest in Kashrus thing. So he was looking into this, to this child. So I'm going to tell you three of the rayas that he brought that it's mutter. Not why. Why is l'chayr because it's pirsha. But three rayas he did, just interesting. Okay. The first is, the Magen Avraham says that when you do b'dikas chametz, instead of doing b'dikas chametz with many people make candles out of animal fat, He says, don't do b'dikas chametz with an animal fat candle because it'll drip on your kalim and it'll make them treif. He says, instead, you should use a beeswax candle. When you go around doing your b'dikas chametz, you should make your candle out of beeswax instead of out of animal fat. Okay, so I'm saying the implication, of course, is that it was mutter. Okay, that the whole point he's trying to make is that you're allowed to eat it, so to speak. You know, he never dreamt of anybody eating it, but it's because it's so pasha that it was mutter. Okay. Okay. There's a shaila whether you're allowed to use treif things in Hanukkah candles. You're allowed to make your Hanukkah candles out of some of this treif, and there are those who hold that it's usher, and there are more mentions, but that they used to make candles out of beeswax. The Hanukkah candles were made out of beeswax. Okay, and last is maybe the Ramah is making about that issue. Okay, so it's the other way around. Shlomo Kluger says you're not allowed to. How would he read what the Ramah says? How is he going to justify that you have to have kosher candles when the Ramah says you're not? So you can just argue on the Ramah. Okay. Right. Okay. So the raya from there. Say the raya how you want it. Okay. Okay. The Rambam says that you use beeswax in the making of dior for tefillin. Okay. We spoke about also at the beginning of the simon. Pasha says that though everything used in making the dior has to be kosher. Okay, we spoke about it, whether it does or doesn't. But Pasha said it has to be mutter b'ficha. And yet he says you should use dior. In the dior has beeswax and it has shayvin. Okay. Anyhow, so we assume that it's kosher. Nowadays they use it to coat candies and make them shiny, put them on fruit. There's even extracts that are made for flavors out of it. So we assume that it's kosher. We assume that it's Persian. Okay, that's the reason why we assume it's mutter because it's Persian.
So the Hasidic, that sprinkles get that too?
That's fine. Everybody uses that. Yeah, people don't use the confectioner's glaze.
Which is, well...
We did speak about
I
it.
must have missed that one. So.
No, you just... Okay.
No,
okay, next. Okay, a few other little things that bees make. Okay, bees collect pollen. Okay, that's really their tafkid, is to collect pollen. They have there's something called a pollen basket. The pollen that you collect from the bees is 100% mutter. That mamish is not even a shiloh being yotze, it's just stuck onto their body. That's for sure. Just comes from the outside, that's mutter. Some bees will mix pollen together with nectar, and then to make something called bee bread. Okay, other people call that ambrosia, kacha. And they feed that to some of their larvae, eat this bee bread. So it's pollen mixed with, what did I say? Nectar. Okay, both of those are mutter. Pollen and nectar are both mutter. So that's fine. Okay, that's also mutter. Okay, there are people eating all these things now.
Called ambrosia?
Yeah, some people call it ambrosia. Okay, and then bees
we have a company.
Bees also collect resins from plants. Okay, and they use a resin like something that it's exuded by the plants. Okay, like saps from certain plants, and they collect it. They mix it with beeswax, and they use it as a sealant for the beehive. Okay, part of that.
Good for tefillin.
I have no idea if it's good for tefillin, but the bees use it, and it's called bee propolis. Okay, and that's a mixture of these resins that it collects from plants together with beeswax, which are both kosher. Okay, the beeswax you said is fine. The resin is also kosher. They drop in. Some people think that they drop in a little saliva also. I mean, we know by honey that they drop in saliva, and that's mutter, presumably because it's bottle. For this also, so that's fine. Bee propolis is also kosher. It also might be not royal achila. Okay, but you're allowed to. Okay, and last, to remind you, we spoke about some time ago. There are people who use bees or bee extract in homeopathic remedies. Okay, we spoke about that, and together with that is that Rabbi Heber tells us that they use bee venom in some medicinal items also. We see venom, like the thing that makes
the sting.
And we spoke about then whether venoms. I don't know if you remember this. We spoke about then whether venoms are really not royal achil or not. Okay, if they're not royal achil, then of course it would be mutter. It's for sure. It's a yotze from the animal. The question is it not royal achil and it's a pirsha? We spoke about that also.